Welcome to the People with Parents podcast, where we talk about, laugh about, and figure out the role reversal and ever-changing relationship between adult children and their parents. And now please, welcome your host, stand-up comedian, author, keynote speaker, and daughter with a capital D, Leanne Lord.
In this episode of People with Parents, we have an interview. I've wanted to do more interviews for the podcast for some time now, and at last I got to have a conversation with Carole Montgomery. She is one of my longtime good friends in stand-up comedy, and even before I started this podcast, I cried many times on her shoulder about my parents because she has already been there, done that. We talk about what it's like to lose them before we lose them, the little things that tell us something's up with Dad. Seeing and admitting the signs of dementia, dealing with hospital delirium, and the UTI bonus round. The reality of nursing homes in the age of COVID, the national conversations we're not having but need to, and why elders need advocates. And how all of this puts aging in perspective. Hello, everybody. My guest today is the creator of the hit show, Funny Women of a Certain Age, which has had two wildly successful specials on Showtime. I've worked with her for many years, here in the States as well as overseas doing shows in the military. She is a longtime stand-up comedian, writer, director, producer, wife, mom, and of course, a daughter. In addition to that, she has been my friend. So Carole Montgomery, welcome to People with Parents.
Hey, that was like, can I leave now? That was like the greatest introduction.
Well, listen, I couldn't do shabby with you. I appreciate you being on the show. You have been with me on my People with Parents journey. The whole, I mean, how many times have I cried on your shoulder?
Oh yeah.
Into a glass of something.
Yes, usually crying while we're drinking Fireball. I think that's
exactly. And you have been able to give me a perspective, I guess, from the other side of it.
Yeah.
Is that accurate to say that?
Yeah.
There is an other side. You won't always be People with Parents.
Right. Because when you started yours, my mom had passed. My mom's been gone now. She's been gone a long time. But my dad was, going through all of the stuff that you ended up going. It was literally like textbook. Like everything you went through, I went through with my dad. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah, I do.
Yeah. So and that was really tough. And I know that you feel the same way because our fathers, we were daddy's girls,
Very much
and
so.
our fathers, my dad, when he was in his prime, when he walked into a room, that was it. Everyone, their eyes went to my dad, because he was such a larger than life human. Mm-hmm. And so to watch him go from that to what he became was heartbreaking. So that was, I think, the most heartbreaking thing for me. The loss, once my dad got into full-blown dementia, it was only a matter of time. Like I would go see him. I would go see him probably once a month. He said, you know the story, but your audience may not. My sister found my dad. She went to go see him one afternoon. She was in Brooklyn for some reason. She had a key. She went in, she found him barely conscious, lying in his own filth. And she immediately called me and said, I'm taking Daddy to the hospital. And I was like, all right, what do you need me to do? And that became the whole journey of having to put him in a home and all that stuff. So the day that happened is when my dad died. Do you know what I mean? Like that, to me, that's when I lost him. Yes, I do. Because then he was just a shell of himself. So when we eventually, and of course it was weeks of him being in the army, military hospital and everything. And when he finally, my sister said, I'm going to keep him in a home near us. I only got to see him once a month. But it was hard because I would go see him and he remembered me, which thank God, he remembered me till the end. But he was still the same. My dad was, I don't know if your dad was like this, but my dad was always the type that when I would call, like when I wasn't living there, and he'd pick up the phone and be like, hey, how you doing? Here's your mom. Like he never.
Yes.
So he still had that in him. Like after 10, 15 minutes of being with him, he'd be like, all right, I want to go back to my room. And I'm like, I just schlepped all the way out here to spend time with you. But that's all, I think that's all he could do at that point. Like his brain couldn't work.
I remember, as I was sort of entering this or like slogging through it, I would tell you, stories. I'm like, he's not showering. He's lying to me. Like, I know he's lying to me. He's lying to my face. And you would sit there like you're doing now. You would shake your head, go, yeah. And then you would tell me something, very similar about your dad that you had already experienced. You walk into the apartment, Dad, are you eating? No. Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, there's some good things that came out of his passing. My sister and I actually are closer than we've ever been since probably we were kids, because she was good at what she did, and I was good at what I did. But I was talking about him losing it for years before this, because you'll really appreciate this. So one of my favorite things to do with my dad after we moved home, because we moved back here in 2006.
And here is, you were in Vegas for many years and then came back to New York.
Yes. So my dad and I would go out to Brooklyn, and we would go to a diner, and we would have political discussions, because my father was a Reagan Democrat. So he voted for Reagan, but he was a Democrat. And I remember sitting with him and having this whole discussion about, because it was 2008, we were already back here, about Obama. And he ended up voting for Obama both times. And that was because we would have these great discussions. By the time 2012 happened, he was already, gone. But so those things. But there were little things that I kept saying to my sister, and my sister didn't want to deal with it. Was, he once called me and goes, I don't know where Debbie's house is. He'd been to her house thousands and thousands of times before GPS, and he made it there. But like stuff like that, and like his car, was so banged up because he had a parking garage next door to where the apartment building, and it was a narrow space. So in the old days, he would be able to do it, but like the car would be knocked up. And I kept saying, Deb, I think something's up with Dad. And the thing about the not showering, I mean, like he once showed up at my sister's house, and he had obviously soiled himself. And my sister's like, and she, of course, she goes from 0 to screaming, and she's yelling at him. I said, Debbie, let's just get him changed, and like, because they just don't care. When I went to visit him after the election, and I said to him, Daddy, do you know who the president is? And he said, no. I said, Donald Trump. And he went, the guy who owns the casinos I gamble in? Like he could
Perfect
not.
Answer. Yeah.
Yeah. But like you can even see that out of the dementia, he was like, that can't be right. You know what I mean?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. What? That's not. I mean, I have dementia, but come on now. So yeah. So it was definitely. I could see him waning more than anybody else did, and everyone was saying I was overreacting. And then of course, you get the call, Daddy's, and then you're just like, okay. So it's very hard to watch them decline like that.
Right.
Todd is going through that with his mom, and they're not, like he keeps saying, he goes, the person that we're seeing now is 70%, maybe 60% of who, my parent is. And she's actually in good shape, more so than, let's say, our fathers were. So do you know what I mean? So I do. Well, let me ask you this. So with your dad, I'm curious because my dad did this for a long time. He hid his. Oh, yes. Okay.
Well, that's when you start reading up about these things, they hide. There's a lot of shame. There's pride. Like in the beginning, they know they've forgotten something, or they know something's missing. It's like an exacerbated "where are my keys" situation.
Oh, absolutely. That's a brilliant way of putting it.
And when that keeps happening, again, there's some pride there. You don't want to admit it. You definitely don't want to admit it to somebody whose diapers you changed.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the real deal. And so, like with my mom, it was easier for her to hide because she was at home.
Right.
And once you take, and not just my mom, but you take them out of their comfortable environment.
Right.
Where they're not in a familiar setting,
Right.
it gets worse. So that's my dad, I'm struggling to remember the name of this, but every time he had the last several years any hospitalizations, he would have this mania. Like it would just,
Yeah.
we'd go for one thing and he'd be out of his mind,
Right.
an hour into it. And I had to learn this is what can happen to elderly people. Even if they don't have dementia, it can mimic it.
Right. Oh yeah.
And if they do have dementia, it just exacerbates it. You want to have some real fun, throwing a UTI.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say that. UTIs will mimic dementia and strokes.
Yeah, and UTI, for anybody listening, is a urinary tract infection, which I don't know how common that is in men. It must mean it does happen, but just to a smaller degree. But when you're a woman, you go to the doctor, you get something, you get a cream, you're fine.
Right.
Really different deal.
Yeah.
When you're elderly.
Oh yeah. And for me, whenever I would get one, and I would get them with some frequency, I would just drink cranberry juice and it would be knocked out. So, but when you get, I don't know what it is with the aging, it may be similar, and I'm not a scientist, so please, don't yell at me, but it might be similar to why the COVID thing affects elderly a certain way. My doorman, and by the way, I live in a rent control apartment, but the co-op has a doorman. He had it, and he was 34 years old, and he was out for 2 weeks, and he said, Carole, he goes, my heart was hurting me. His heart, we're not even talking about the lungs. He said, my heart was hurting me so much, I thought for sure I was having a heart attack.
Wow.
And he didn't go to the hospital, because a lot of COVID cases ended up, people said, yes, you have it, but go home. You don't need to be hospitalized. But the point I'm making is that he's 34 and his heart was hurting. What happens if you're 85 years old and you have a heart problem?
Yeah. You
have a lung problem. That's why so many elderly people are dying from this. And in the same vein, that's why you think something like with the UTI for us, we're normal, healthy women. Well, for somebody in their 70s or 80s, for some reason, it becomes a whole different ballgame.
Since you're there and you're watching this sort of real time with your mother-in-law, how is your husband dealing with this? Because it's family, but it's different when it's your mom or your dad. And is he in denial still?
No,
or is he? I mean, if he's married to you, it's hard to be in any denial.
Well, you know what? We've always had issues with her. We still have issues. So he has, Todd's a very loving and caring human, and which is ironic because I hate everybody. But
that's love. Opposites attract. You get what you need.
And he was always very open to everything about what was going on until recently. And when all the heavy duty bullshit started to happen, he was like, I'm a 60-year-old man. I don't need to deal with this. I'm being treated like I'm 15. So he's basically, for lack of a better word, blocked that part of his heart. And because in his head, she's already gone. Do you know what I mean? And I'm telling you.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, and that's very unusual for him because he's somebody who will give somebody a chance a million times. Me, I'm like, you fuck me once, you're out. As you know, because you've seen me interact with certain people. So, but I've never seen him. He's just like, no, this is her. If this is what she wants to do, then this is what she wants to do. And it's hard. It's very hard because the illusion is that everything is okay, and it's not, because there's just it's the little things, the tiny little things of buying a container of milk that sits in the fridge for 3 months.
It's those little things that you can't explain to someone who hasn't been through it.
I mean, like, I remember when we would go. My dad was he loved tchotchkes and all these, and he would collect these. But to the point where it became really, like, that was another way we knew he was slipping, because he literally, his whole coffee table was just covered in just crap, like cheap, 30-cent things he would just buy at the store and probably grab and put them in his pocket, knowing my father, because he had sticky fingers. He had, my dad would come home with things going, this fell off a truck. And I'm like, Dad, let me come over and clean. And he's like, no, I have a girl come in. He never had a girl come in. It would just get dirtier and dirtier.
the evasions and the stories that they'll make up on the spot. Like, who do you think's buying this story, sir? Let me ask you this. Did you notice this with your dad and me, and now with your mother-in-law, that they can somehow manage to pull it together for strangers?
Yes.
And so the
Yes.
strangers don't see what you're seeing, because
Nope.
this person who was just bonkers 5 minutes ago is now
Mhm.
lucid, having conversations.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, and then you look like the bad guy because you're like, well, they're fine.
Yes, I feel like I had those arguments when I would take my dad to the doctor, because for him it's a social outing.
Yes.
He's complaining the entire time, what's wrong until we get there.
Mhm.
Mr. Lord, good to see you. What's wrong? Oh, nothing.
Yeah.
My daughter just wanted to bring me in. No, she didn't. That's not what she had planned today. And he would present, like the back would get a little straighter.
Right.
And so the doctors are fooled. And I think that's my problem with the medical profession. Not everybody, but it's like they kind of see what they want to see. Again, because they only have a 15-minute appointment.
Right. Especially with what's happening right now during the pandemic. They are so overwhelmed. You would think that doctors would not be fooled. Do you know what I mean? You would really think doctors would not be fooled about this stuff. And yet they go, no, they're fine.
If you've been with the same doctor for a long time, it is almost like seeing an old friend.
Right.
And they want to see their old patient with kind eyes.
No, that's exactly true. They don't want to see that the same way I don't want to see, didn't want
Right.
to see my dad declining. They don't want to see them declining.
No, they don't. So it's not out of malice that this happens, but that's why it's almost even more important to be an advocate.
Right.
To go, no, I need you to look and see what's really going on here.
Right.
And I think if there's a flaw in the system, it's they don't have enough geriatric training.
Oh, no,
because
absolutely.
the body at 70 is not the body at 50.
Mm-hmm.
Which is scary, because
Yeah.
the body at 50 is not the body at 30.
Yeah. I remember when I turned 30, I thought I was so fucking old, and I'm like, I would do anything.
And as I mentioned up front, you guys, my friend Carole Montgomery here is a stand-up comic, and so Carole, you can attest to this. We'll be in clubs pre-pandemic, and hear younger comics, and they say, "Oh, I just turned 30," and they're serious. They feel so old.
Yeah.
But I don't laugh. I don't poke fun, because it is what they feel.
Right.
If they're comparing it to being 18, they got one foot in the grave.
That's the whole thing about living, is when you're all of a sudden like, wait a minute. I mean, I'm 62 years old. I mean, I'm basically in the high risk group now.
Yeah, when they keep putting that age out there, I'm like, are y'all sure? That doesn't feel right.
No, it doesn't feel right.
I will say for people who are 30 or people who are 20 who feel old, I will tell you, I had similar thoughts, and what dissuaded me of that was hanging out with 80-year-olds. You start hanging out with old folks, it puts things in perspective. That they are only going to move but so fast. Yeah. We're only going to get one thing done that day. We're not running to multiple stores. We're not running lots of errands. It's one thing. My favorite thing was they want to go out. They want to go out. They want to go out. We go out. We want to go home. We want to go home. We want to go home.
Yeah, and that's totally a child. That's totally what a child does.
Yes.
I want to go. I want to go. I want to. That's the other thing that people have to realize when your parents start to age is they are the child. I was feeding my dad because my dad would, one of the things about dementia, I don't know if this happened with your dad, but they don't like to swallow.
That can become a problem. Yes.
And so he would, eat something, and then he'd get the flavor, and then he'd spit it out. So I would have to sit. So literally towards like the last 6 months of his life, the only thing he would eat is marshmallows.
Oh.
So we bought, and my sister was like, but that's pure sugar. I said, he's eating something.
He's eating something.
Let him eat the bag of marshmallows. At least there's something in his system, because nothing else he would eat. And that was just so, remember, this is my, as you know, this is our daddy. This is the man that I don't remember a lot about my childhood. I just don't, because it wasn't a bad childhood. It was a great childhood, but I only have specific moments that I remember. And one was when I was a little girl. We lived in an apartment building. We had not a stoop, but we had a step to go up to get into the building. And my mom had bought me a dress. You're gonna love this, a dress. And the dress had, I should look this up. I'm sure you can find that. But the dress had this thing underneath it that you could blow up to make it look really puffy.
Oh, crinoline, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I for some reason was wearing this dress.
I can't even imagine you in this dress, Montgomery. My mind is blown right now. How long have I known you? I can't even imagine it.
And I was a little girl. I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. And I was twirling to make the dress, and I, of course, as a kid, I used to get dizzy spells. So I had a dizzy spell after I twirled, and I smacked right onto the end of that stoop thing and cut open my lip. I remember this like it was yesterday. Obviously, somebody went and told my dad, they called, and he came running down the stairs, grabbed me. My doctor was 2 blocks away, bleeding, running to the doctor's office to get this, And so then to see him go to this tiny man who only ate marshmallows, it's heartbreaking.
Of the fights to have, I tried to stop having the food fights.
Right.
Now, I will say that, my dad has, up to almost to the very end, he continued to eat. That last couple of weeks were the worst. But because my theory is because him and my mom grew up so poor, like even in dementia, they're like, no, we'll eat.
Yeah.
Now, what my mom will eat has changed,
right.
Like she won't eat meat, chicken, fish. And every, few weeks, it's like we're doing the dance. What will she eat now? And it's mostly now soft foods, sweets, things with a strong taste, sweets or salt. So I come down and she's got like a plate of Ritz crackers and some grapes. I'm not arguing.
It's so interesting what happens. Like my sister's mellowed since the whole situation, I mean, it changed her personality. But when we would get there together, and my father, my father was quite an interesting, but he knew how to mess with her. Like when he saw me, he would like wink at me, like even in the dementia, like he would do things like not eat, and because he knew it would upset her. And then I would lean in and go, would you just eat something for me? And he'd eat it, but he would love it. He used to love to mess with her. And it was just,
wow.
You know what I mean?
Like she didn't know that?
Nope. She just, he knew how to press those buttons.
Somebody once told me, you complain like, why do they do that? How do they know how to press your buttons? And then somebody said, because they're the ones who installed the buttons.
Exactly. That's great. That's absolutely the truth. My dad and I had, I think I've told you this, that I if I ever get back to writing my second solo show, I want the name of the solo show to be I Am My Father's Son. I was the son he never had. We never had those issues that way. I mean, look, as much as I love my father, did he do horrible things? Of course, every human does horrible things. My father was a high school teacher and a bookie. So there you go.
You're raising kids in New York. You need a side hustle.
And I remember you gave me that great joke. Who better than to teach craps? You're
welcome.
But you know what I mean? Like, so he wasn't an angel in any way, but years and years ago, when I was pregnant with my son, who was 28, as you know, he ended up having, he had a heart attack. My sister was with him. I was working, you'll love this. I was working for youre, John Yoder in Detroit, in Michigan.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it was one of those, that group, remember when they used to do the one-nighter tour where you do different, okay. Yes. And I was somewhere in some Great Lake in the middle of Michigan. And I guess that I had called home on the hotel phone. Wow. Todd said, your dad had a heart attack, call your sister. And so, because there were no cell phones then, he was fine. They took him to the hospital. He went to have surgery. So when I went to see him, everything changed for us when I was sitting on his bed, sitting there talking to him, and he grabbed my pinky with his pinky, which is ironic because his nickname was Pinky. And he grabbed my pinky and he held it. And we didn't talk. And Todd was there, my mother was there, and it was just like everything changed at that moment. That was his way of going, you know how much I love you. you know. In my mother's case, because she died so long ago, and I was in Vegas when she passed. My biggest regret with my mom is that she didn't get to see Lane grow up. That to me is my biggest regret with my mom, you know. But my mother, my poor sister, my mother died in my sister's arms. It's like my parents just
Oh man. And I like your sister. She can't catch a break.
I know. My poor sister. And to this day, she won't talk about it. I said, what happened? And she says, I don't want to talk about it. I said, okay. All right.
Listen, I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't either. Even after several fireballs, I would not.
Yeah.
You said something interesting. You said that, you know, you feel like this experience changed your sister. Is there anything about, you know, just watching this process with your dad and what you went through, did it change you in any way? And if it didn't, like, what's your takeaway? Like, what did you learn that you would tell somebody who's starting to go through this? I mean, and those are two wildly separate questions, but you know, I'm giving you a choice, whichever one, you know, you feel you can answer.
For all my bluster, which I have a lot of, I'm not somebody that really shows the softer side of me. You know, I took my time to grieve with my dad, and when you lose your father, I think for a woman, it's like, that's your protector.
Yes.
And I've always been my own protector for many, many years, just because I was in an abusive relationship, and that's a whole other podcast. So it's very hard for me to take help, and I don't really do it a lot, but I'm trying to learn how to now. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's what I'm learning from this, is that because my dad is gone, he's not there anymore. So it's that I think was the hardest thing, is how to learn to accept help. And as far as what for other people, we all have issues with our parents. You're watching this person who you knew as this, you know, Mrs. Lord was quite the lady.
She was a formidable matron, queen of the house.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you could not have two queens in the house.
Right.
I was the princess.
Right.
she was the queen.
Exactly. So when you see that, you have to learn that's part of life. I know that sounds like very cliche, but it's just, you have to take care of yourself.
Actually not, because we don't talk about it. It would be different if they say, oh yeah, that's life, and then you talked about that part of life. We don't, you know, which is kind of why this whole podcast happened, because I'm like, what is happening?
Right.
What? I didn't get the original Birds and Bees talk really well. This one, not at all.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people are in that situation, which is why I feel this conversation is so important.
Well, you know, I've said this to you, because at some point this will be something bigger, because everyone is going through this, like, especially now with all the elderly people that are passing right now. Like, when I think about the deaths in the nursing homes due to COVID, and I understand why. I absolutely understand.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I was lucky. Then this is where my sister's really good. She's like me on steroids. She got him the best. The nursing home it was sparkling clean. Sparkling clean. But, like, for example, there was a woman who used to, whenever we would get there, she would always like, are you going to take me home? And I'm like, no, I'm here to see Paul. But she was the one that used to go into everyone's rooms and steal stuff, because all the doors are open. So let's just say, for example, this woman had the disease, and now she's gone into 20 different rooms, opening the doors. Now you can't expect the caretakers to wash everything down 24. You just can't.
It's not practical.
And you can't tell an old person to put gloves on.
No.
You know, and they're scratching their balls, and they're picking their nose, and they're, you know.
It's like a classroom of 3-year-olds.
Right. So I totally get why the nursing homes were hit this way. And that was not the question, so I went off on a tangent. But your show is very important for people, and hopefully this becomes something more to the point, because nobody is talking about this. And if the one thing I can say to your audience is, this is an important discussion, because everyone is going through it. You know, when my son, who's 28, saw his grandfather, because my father gotten really sick before he passed, like 6 months ahead of time, and he was in the hospital. And to my son, he was this poppy. He was this, and to see him literally look like he was 90 pounds in a fetal position, I know Lane was thinking, oh shit, and this is going to happen to mom and dad too. Nobody has this discussion, and you have to have it because there are plenty of people that don't take care of their parents. You know, they put them in a home, and I literally.
Well, if you can even afford a home, you know,
right.
That's a whole nother discussion.
Right. In my sister's defense, man, she was there every day with him.
I actually, because my dad, I want to say he did at least 2 stints, possibly 3, but I clearly remember 2 stints in, they called it rehab.
Yes,
but he was in a nursing home. But it's difficult. My experience was like not opposite of yours, but opposite of most people. When he went into rehab, I saw him more than when he was at home.
Right.
Because there was a reason for me to go, if not every day, you know, and I had a couple of friends that were like, you got to stop doing that. You got to take a day off. You know, and I'm like, how do I take a day off from my life? Right. But they're like, it's your health, it's your sanity. And because of where his mind was, he didn't know he hadn't seen me the day before.
Right.
You know, it's like, it was almost like dealing with a puppy, you know, not to be insulting, you know, but if I was gone for 2 days, he didn't know that. It was like he had just seen me. But I spent more time there because I thought it was important, of course, to check up on him, but for the people at that place to see me.
Right.
I knew the people at the check-in desk. I knew the nurses on the floor. You know, I knew the folks, not necessarily in the kitchen, but, you know, when the cook came out, I was like, you know, that orzo was really good the other day. And they're like, oh, really? You had that? Yes, I did. Because my dad didn't like to eat alone. You know, he would maintain that social skill pretty much up to the end. So if they brought his food and I was there, they had to bring a plate for me.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many people. It's a national problem. That is only, with everything that's happening now, is only going to be magnified because we have to do something. You know, not everybody, you know, is a paid politician that gets health care for life and doesn't have to worry about who's going to be wiping their ass when they're senile. And some of them are senile and they're still working.
We'll call no names.
Yes, we'll call no names. It's so important to have these discussions about it because nobody wants to talk about it. It's so.
Well, I get it. These are not sexy conversations.
No, they're not. No,
they're not. And I mean, part of me was surprised when they were talking about, oh yeah, now you can't go to the nursing home to see your mom or dad or grandparents. And I'm like, I spent some time there. Nobody was knocking down the doors.
Right.
To see these folks. And I do hope, picking up on what you said a little earlier, that this begins to not even change the conversation, open the conversation about caregiving, about, you know, the role reversal, you know, the elderly, because we haven't had these conversations in a real substantive way. And I think it's particularly important because that sandwich generation right now, mostly Gen X, but not only Gen X, but mostly is a lot smaller than the generation before it and the generation after it. And it just can't carry the weight of the generations that are squeezing it. And so we're going to need real help, real conversations, and a real podcast like mine.
No, I mean, I was thinking about this. I was like, how could we get you onto Sirius? Because this is, to me, this should be, you know, I
agree.
You know, like, how do you cope with this?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see the need for that now.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, just because so much has broken down, and it's too much to ask for people to carry all by themselves.
Yeah, no, and
I would love to see my show there, and particularly now since, I mean, I love what I've done before, and I'll continue to do it, you know, with my little stories, you know, and anecdotes. I think it'll be more possible now that I'm expanding to having interviews, bringing in people who can talk about their experience. And I think the more we all talk about it, the more people get the idea, oh, they're not alone.
Right.
We're in this. We process it somehow through our art, and it can be jokes on stage for us. Right. It can be a podcast. It could be a book. It can be a screenplay. It's going to be something.
Right.
Because that's how we process it. And with you, you know, if you already had a, how should I say, not ideal relationship. Dementia almost never makes that better. I'm just saying, you know, I've heard tell of people who get the sweet dementia.
Yeah.
You know, like because the personalities shift. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm waiting on that.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because my dad was sweet to the end. You know, he
Oh.
was, you know, he never, you know, like a childlike version of himself. I'm sure that my sister dealt with more of it, you know, like fighting with him because he was always, like I said, he always liked to fuck with her. So she probably dealt with that. I'm sure if you interviewed her, it would be a different story.
I'm sure it would be. I'm sure it would be.
You know this because we're daughters, and when we both had very strong fathers, that you keep him with you. You know, like I think, like you mentioned the two specials that I did. You know, like he didn't get to see that. He didn't get to hear any of that.
Yeah.
And I know that he would be like, he would have been that guy walking in going, yeah, that's my daughter, she's on Showtime. Like, you know, that would have been my dad.
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
Yeah, because when I did the first TV show I ever did, I don't even know if you know this about my dad. Like when I first started doing stand up, they never came to see me. They never
Really?
supported me for like 2 or 3 years. And then one day I was talking to my mom and I said, how come you and Daddy never come to see me? And she goes, Daddy's afraid that you're going to bomb.
That's honest.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
And then the first 2 or 3 years, yeah.
yeah. So then when I first did my first TV show, I think it was Comic Strip Live. Yeah, I was living in Los Angeles and I called my dad on a payphone afterwards and said, so what do you think? He goes, now I know how a dad feels when his son hits a home run.
We have been on for quite a while.
Yes, we have.
I want to, formally, say thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. And as I, launch doing more interviews, I think sharing your experience with my listening audience is important. And I thank you for it.
Thanks for listening to People with Parents. Please share the podcast with your friends and family and leave a review on iTunes. People with Parents is lived, written, and produced by stand-up comedian, author, and keynote speaker Leanne Lord. Visit her at veryfunnylady.com. And remember, we make them parents. They make us people. Crazy people.